Thanks everyone for joining this webinar. A special thanks to our speaker here, Jessica from Qwit. Really appreciate Jessica joining this. So today's session, we're really going to focus on more from there's a lot of evolution happening in the space of pay equity, and so we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be I'm going to be asking a lot of questions from to Jessica, really kind of share her experience along the lines of what's happening in pay equity. From there on, we're going to go for the business case for change, and a lot of companies are now evaluating how do we do this on a constant basis. How do we really convince leadership that we need to change the way that we're operating. We're going to get into that. Obviously, get Jessica's insight on how she convinced, leadership, or how leadership was brought on board at Qwit, for basically, monitoring pay equity on a consistent basis and really making it part of the day-to-day life. And then we'll get into what the different teams that are involved in this pay equity journey, pay equity analyses. We'll look at what different teams care about and share that information with the audience here today. And then just kind of get into a little bit of PayParity system that is integrated with the SAP success factors and get into that a little bit here. So that's the outline, that's the agenda. As Olivia mentioned, just please at any given point in time, if you have a question, just drop it in the chat and we will address that question as we go along. So getting into the pay equity landscape, there's definitely a imperative for change. We definitely are seeing a lot of organizations now are getting into making pay equity, pay equity, opportunity equity, just a part of their regular day-to-day operations in the compensation space and the DEI space and the HR space. So there's clearly an imperative for change, but this imperative for change initially and for the longest time was just purely based on an ethical imperative. So we know that back in the day, pay equity, achieving pay equity, ensuring that you have equitable compensation practices was purely from the standpoint of an ethical imperative. It's the right thing to do. It's the most important thing to do, right? So that was what was the primary driver for large organizations to consider making it part of their day-to-day operations. But that was the imperative that existed back in the day. Then came this legal imperative. So, in the last few years, pay equity picked on as not just a buzzword, but it really did pick up within the industry. A lot of organizations started to get under legal troubles for not practicing fair pay or fair promotion practices or fair opportunity practices. And a lot of organizations started to see that lawsuits coming their way. And this really drove more organizations at that point to start considering evaluating their compensation practices. And these lawsuits were not just limited to large companies. These were also like mid-sized organizations, small-sized organizations. And the most famous case of Birmingham, which was the whole city got sued and had to declare bankruptcy, which was in the UK. So there was a lot of legal class action lawsuits that were happening, and that really drove a lot of organizations to go from this is ethically important to do, but in addition to ethically importance, we have to now do this to avoid any kind of legal litigation risk that we have, or at least minimize, or at least be aware of what that risk is and start to chip away at those issues to avoid any kind of litigation risk. So that kind of became an imperative. Finally, then in the last couple of years, we saw, this was pre-COVID, and during COVID, we saw that pay equity then also became a way to attract and retain employees within the organization. And, it started to become more of that it actually does help the bottom line. It does help the business. It creates a better team environment. It creates it has much better productivity that eventually flows into the bottom line of the organization. So this really business imperative started to happen in the last 3 or 4 years. And we started to see now organizations saying, well, it was the right thing to do. It still is the right thing to do. It's the legal risk that we have to look at. And now it's also a business imperative that, we're not able to attract the right talent, but if we do post our ranges publicly, we have a higher percentage of employees really applying for those jobs, and really we're getting maybe a lot more candidates applying to those jobs, and we have a bigger pool of applicants. So, it became more of a business imperative. And then finally, in the last 2 years, this has become more prevalent, which is now it's a compliance imperative. So you went from ethical to legal to business, and in the last 2 years, it's become a must-have compliance imperative. Canada has a lot of aggressive pay equity laws. In the US, you have a lot of pay equity laws. EU has their own EU pay transparency directives. Now it's becoming, okay, well, we have to do the analyses to avoid legal risk. It's the right thing to do to attract employees or candidates. But now we also have to submit a component of this analysis or a component of the data to various government agencies, and it's becoming a compliance imperative. So that's kind of the evolution that we've seen in the pay equity landscape. At this point, I'm going to invite Jessica. Jessica, from your perspective at Kiewit and just your expertise in the industry, what are your thoughts around these different kind of imperatives, and was one of these imperative kind of much more heavily weighted towards your decision of doing this on a more frequent basis?
Yeah, I think it starts with just your company culture, right? Here at Kiewit, we have a Women in Kiewit initiative that was started many years ago, and trying to drive that in the construction industry. And then that kind of grew to be not only Women in Kiewit, but a whole diversity, equity, inclusion type of review at our organization. And so I do think that the one benefit of what we have here at Kiewit is just culturally, they want that. Our leadership teams expect that. And then that's going to generate the buy-in to go down the path of, okay, now how do we actually meet these imperatives when it comes to a compliance and legislative standpoint? For us, I am based in Canada. However, our company is headquartered in the US. And so often our corporate entities sometimes don't know some of the regulations that might cross borders. And we were first hit by some of the equal pay for equal value work laws that came in Quebec. And that was a compliance. You have to submit this every 5 years. And so we outsourced that. We originally used a consultant. We met our obligations, did the study, passed that study every 5 years. And then we said, okay, we're looking at this at one point in time because we were forced to, but how can we look at this ongoingly in terms of how we're bringing people in-house, how we're paying our employees that we want to be with us for the longevity of their careers? And so we did an in-house study. About 4 years ago, we did a very draft kind of view. The following year, we did a very inclusive study across every region and market that we were in. And the results did come back that we wanted to make some adjustments. We aligned that with our adjustments for the cycle that we had that year. And then correspondingly, it's one study, one point in time, right? We've hired people, we've lost people during that time. And really, I think with all the additional laws that came, then our executive body was like, okay, but did we need to do those? Did we do it the right way? Did we do it the proper way? And so it was, what avenue can we go down? Do we want to just repeat an in-house study on an annual basis? Are there other advances and things in the industry in terms of expertise, technology, and an objective view that we could leverage to really get support and generate the thought that we were doing it the right way? And so essentially that's where we went down the path of building a business case to see what other opportunities could we have, and is in-house the best way, or could we outsource this study, or could we get more technologically advanced and actually apply a solution using technology and then influence our ongoing processes with that?
Got it. No, that's certainly helpful, Jessica. Thanks for sharing that. A quick kind of question on that, Jessica, was with the advent of these really robust regulations, have you seen the way that you're thinking about it or your team's thinking about pay equity has changed slightly, or is it still the same and you're just tagging on the compliance component to it? Has there been any kind of change towards how you view the analyses, how you conduct the analyses?
Yeah, I think in terms of how we view the analysis and how we conduct it, it definitely was more segregated when we first did it, right? It was, let's look at women and men, let's look at the ethnically race populations that we have and look at it like that. And then, as a comp professional, you really take a step back and you say, well, if we make changes just on this front, are we really truly isolating some of these more intersectional studies that can be done? And are there ways that we can do that in-house, or do we really need to get more statistically advanced in terms of some of the data science that's out there? I mean, data analytics has just expanded substantially over the last few years, be that for turnover trends, as well as just these other more forceful regulations when it comes to, are we paying our people fairly and equivalently across the board? And then for us, I think the other aspect of it was that what we wanted to see was that employees are aware of these things, right? There's, access to this information externally, whether or not we want to put it out there or not. And the last thing that you want is to have a very, poor employee experience and where they're pushing you in that direction versus if you're as a company saying, hey, I'm the employer looking out for the best interest of my employees, I'm going to get ahead of this. I'm going to help you understand what we evaluate here at Hewitt in terms of how we want to pay our people fairly and what does that mean at our organization, because that can be different and that can be different across industries, countries, right? And how you want to define that is the way you get to shape that message is by being a little bit more transparent and having ensure that your employees understand what your comp philosophy is probably ground zero even before knowing, hey, what does employee A pay compared to employee B?
That's interesting, Jessica. So that question comes up a lot on, especially like the pay transparency component, not just from the standpoint of like, hey, we want to do it from a compliance perspective, but really to your point, being transparent with your employees. For the audience here, for the ones that are thinking about being transparent with their employees, what are some of your kind of tidbits that you can share with them on how you maybe achieved that within the organization, or on, hey, here's what we compensate for, and here's how we adjust pay at merit cycle. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we noticed was, did our employees understand the growth of their careers here? We try to infuse this type of hire to retire type mentality where we want you to be able to expand your career, grow into different departments, maybe different skill sets, without having to leave the organization. And so I think for us, we were able to leverage our job architecture to say, hey, do we have a job architecture that we can speak to about their career paths and their career development? Because the more that you're transparent on that front, the less they're pushing to know about exactly what is Sally paid compared to Joe, and they actually understand how they're going to develop, and as they gain skill sets, hopefully be compensated for those skill sets.
That makes sense. Um, Interesting. Um, Definitely, I think the key point being kind of being transparent with the job architecture and how you set the pay and how you kind of what is the compensation policy per se, like that. If I was to summarize it, like, Jessica, would that be fair to say that really just be transparent on how people are placed into positions, how people get promoted to the next positions, what is the next promotion, and how is pay set essentially, and how can you get to the next stage? Would that be kind of fair to say if I was to summarize it?
Yeah, that has really been our experience, anyways, is that the more clear you are on that front, the less you actually are addressing more of these forceful conversations of, well, I saw this salary range in this posting and I'm not paid that. But they actually understand how their pay is determined, when their pay is determined, the things that go into influencing that, the drivers that are specific often to your own company, right? We're here at Hewitt, we're very performance based. And so,
Mhm.
it's not just a flat, everyone gets the same cost of living adjustment on an annual basis. And so we never really have to deal with some of those questions because employees know, hey, my raise is going to be often, yes, there's a performance of the economic, situation in certain locations that's going to drive some of our budgeting for certain things, but my ultimate raise is unique to my performance that I'm contributing throughout the year. And so having that focus be more on that explanation and that transparency has helped us in leaps and bounds over the past few years to not be forced into a corner on this different topics of pay equity across the board.
Got it. No, that makes sense, Jessica. Thanks for sharing that. With respect to, I mean, moving on to like the DMU, which is really the what we call as the decision making unit. These are all of the teams that are involved at some stage during a pay equity analyses or pay equity. You do an analysis, and then there's the monitoring component, and then there's the avoid creating a pay equity issue at the time of hire, promotion. So these are like the different teams that are going to be involved at any given point in time. There's the total rewards and compensation team. Of course, they are the principal owners of this project or this initiative within the organization. There's the legal folks that are principally involved from the standpoint of whether or not your methodology is comprehensive. Is it skipping a step? Is it defensible per se? So legal teams are kind of involved from that standpoint of obviously United States, there's the legal teams are more involved from an attorney-client privilege, but definitely during the whole discussion phase, the kinds of questions that legal teams are asking is really on methodology. So methodology around how you group your employees, is there statistical proof or statistical empirical tests that are run for distinctiveness, pooling, partitioning, whether how do you select your drivers of pay? Are those drivers of pay tested independently for any kind of subjectivity? Those are the kind of questions that a lot of legal teams are asking. I mean, in fact, there's been experts in the industry that have indicated that methodology is the most important thing when it comes to analyzing pay, whether you do it internally, whether you do it with a software solution, whether you do it with a consultant or a law firm. Methodology at the end of the day is the most important thing. And then there's the new kind of teams that have started to get involved with the whole compliance imperative that we were talking about, which is really the compliance team, which is we're seeing like HR compliance team working very closely with compensation teams to submit the pay data to different jurisdictions, whether it's Spain, UK, France, in the US, California, and Canada, within the different provinces. So Australia, so HR compliance teams are really getting heavily involved and working in partnership with the compensation teams. And then you have your HRIS team that's becoming more and more prevalent now with companies transitioning, to Jessica's point, maybe thinking about transitioning to a more robust kind of software experience, connection to an SAP system. Since this webinar is really kind of focused on SAP is imperative, and to just get the data on a regular basis into the platform in a very controlled manner, not having to upload it manually or input stuff manually. It's becoming more and more important. And then you have your HR people leaders, of course, wanting to see, hey, are we heading in the right direction? Asking questions like, if I was to give you $1 or €1, what is my return on investment going to be in fixing these kind of issues? So there's different teams now that are involved cross-functionally, but obviously comp teams still own it. But Jessica, in when you were making this decision, even now when you're working through, pay equity analyses, what are your thoughts on these different teams kind of getting involved? Are you seeing a change that maybe initially it was just compensation team, and now you're getting questions from HR leadership, DEI, legal? Are you getting HRIS people involved? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so for us, I mean, I think the first thing was when we were talking with basically the two leaders of our executive body that are most at the forefront of some of these decisions and what we want to do surrounding this, it was let's keep this to a very niche group. I think you want to control that message, and you want to control some of those decisions. And sometimes until those decisions are made, the broader audience you have, the less control you have over whether or not that decision is the right one. And so we basically had our two executives. We had one of our DEI kind of officers that has a big role in that space be involved, and then legal. Legal was involved from day one, and I think that's important. I think anytime you're dealing with privileged information, even for salary survey submissions, right, we have our legal teams aware of which ones we're submitting to, et cetera. We only went down the path of getting our technology teams involved when we had got the support to go with a technology solution. And even then, they don't really have access to the data. They're just helping us get integrated. So they're aware of these processes taking place at our organization. And then I think after we had our first study done ad hoc while we're going through the integration process, we got pretty positive results that confirmed that the methodology and approaches that we had taken in-house were leading us in the right direction. So that affirmation was probably the biggest thing that we wanted from going with an external party to help us in this space, and it did that. And so that was really a positive outcome of this. And then now it was, okay, as we know, data is not stagnant. We know the second we pull it, we're still looking at that data for weeks on end, trying to analyze it this way, cut it and dice it this way. And so having a technology solution, we have SAP, and we're able to shift what we want to look at, what lens we want to look at, if we want to reevaluate what some of the factors that we consider as important for influencing our wage decisions, if we want to dice a different market or segment to understand specifically in one area if we have an issue, we're able to do that rather than just have a consultant do one blank study and then have them go repeat another one based off of additional questions that we have after the first run. And so for us, we're ready to tell our employees that we are doing these things, taking this stance, and being proactive on this front, and have them educated to know that us as an organization, your leadership team, they care about these things, and we're not just being forced to do them, but we want to do them. And so I do think it's important to keep kind of one key member almost. Even on my compensation team, I run the department, and I'm actually the only one involved in this space. None of my team is involved in it. That does keep the data integrity very intact. And then it also keeps, the opinion or the communication of that message very clear once it does go out.
Got it. And in your opinion, Jessica, like how important, I mean, obviously technology has its role. Like you said, it's just gives the power back to you to help you kind of monitor progress, rerun it through different lenses. But how important is it to get kind of the foundation and the methodology right from the get-go before you even kind of start analyzing it? How crucial is methodology, in a software solution?
I think that's probably your key right there, is your methodology and getting your factors narrowed down, making sure that those that you're presenting the information believe in your methodology and your approach and what you have defined as important for your organization, because it has to be repeatable. right? The advancement of using technology is that I can rerun it, but you want to rerun it the same way. Yes, you might want to cut and dice what you're looking at and get a little granular here or there to isolate maybe certain issues in certain areas if those come up. But for the most part, you want to say, I looked at it this way this year and I looked at it that way again next year. And so I think methodology is probably the first thing that I would recommend you really get an agreement and alliance with your leadership team that is going to be making the decisions whether or not you're going to pursue that type of solution.
Got it. And building on that, Jessica, like I know a lot of questions that come up is, we have global employees, we have employees in Europe, we have employees in Canada, we have employees in the US, Australia, Asia Pacific, and obviously different geographic regions. Like Europe, talks more about the gender equity component. US, it's very important to look at it through the intersection of basically gender, race, age, disability, veteran, sexual orientation. But a lot of companies don't have that data, so they're really looking at gender and race to begin with. But how important, in your opinion, Jessica, is looking at it through the lens of a true intersectional analysis?
Yeah, I think that is one of the major reasons that we wanted to go with a technology solution, was because that intersectional analysis will likely give you different results than just isolating it to male or female, right? Because it can compound when you start to bring ethnicity or age into the mixture. And you want to make sure that if you do have to make changes, you're targeting the right types of changes, right? And that you didn't make a change that actually was counterintuitive to a positive outcome. So for us, the intersectional analysis was actually a very big pro in our business case, and being able to do that with a statistically relevant set of methodology and conduct that where you had that kind of confidence in the approach.
Got it. Yeah, I mean that comes around a lot, is the intersectional, and I am with you, Jessica, where we've seen where you run a gender-only regression model and you run a race ethnicity-only regression model. There's two separate models. You're not really capturing the shared experiences of different employees in this one single, as opposed to having this one single model that can capture the shared experiences of different genders and different race ethnicity categories. So thank you for sharing that. With respect to how, like, from a business case, I know Kiewit was at the forefront of it, right? Leadership was already on board. There's the women initiative within the organization. So there's a lot of great stuff that Kiewit was doing already. So, but from a business case perspective, Jessica, how did you approach that? How do you create a business case? What did you present to leadership to get their buy-in? Not just buy-in, but sometimes leadership says, "Yeah, that's a great thing that we want to do, but maybe next year," right? So how do you create that urgency? I think that would be great to understand that.
Yeah, I think setting the tone on just what's required is important for them to be aware of that. But then you also have to think about what is your ROI, right? Your decision-making unit is always going to think about your ROI. Obviously, consultants, technology companies, often they're going to offer that service to help you build your ROI, but you are ultimately the one speaking to that. And so ultimately, I think it's important to get some of their expertise and pull, but be able to say, what else is out there? This is why I'm not proposing this solution, or we could go this way. It's going to benefit us in XYZ, but if we go this way, these are the other advantages. So, I do really think you have to do that ROI analysis. But before you even do that, build your methodology and your approach and how you're going to actually structurally run your compensation processes with this in mind. How do you infuse the advantages that this is offering you into your processes? It's going to be a big thing that they say, hey, we're not just doing this at one point in time, but we're going to know we're paying people right today and we're paying people right tomorrow. And so for us, the technology was a solution that we could infuse it into our processes, run it before an annual cycle, conduct our recommendations. During that process, have some thoughtful conversations with the ones making decisions on wages, and then rerun that study post any increases to make sure that what we've recommended has actually made a difference if it was needed.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. So, and kind of ROI, just one last thing on the ROI component, Jessica, was, a lot of leadership, yep, they think about it in the ROI context. So is the ROI, when people here are thinking about building an ROI, is it like a quantitative ROI number? Is it a mixture of quantitative analyses and qualitative components, like, oh, if we do this, then we're going to attract maybe 10% more applicants, right? It's more of a qualitative. What are your thoughts on that? Is it a combination of the two?
Yeah, it's not just cost, right? It's not just a consultant would cost us this much or software would cost us this much, right? It's, when we looked at the in-house study we did, we then were able to say, okay, well, we made adjustments on, these 30 people. How did we retain them over the last 3 years? Right. And you could see the groups of people that we actually made an adjustment were retained. And we were able to show, hey, this does make a difference. We've retained the people that we thought were, a little bit out of line for these reasons. But then it also forced us to really think internally on, is there biases in how we're promoting people? Is there biases in how we're rating or our performances of our employees? And do we also need to think about some coaching and managing of our managers that are impacting these decisions? And so that internal look was also something that was exposed through that ROI and saying, hey, this does make a difference.
Understood. That's awesome. No, thank you for sharing that, Jessica. So here's a poll question for everyone in the audience. Just really, how are you doing pay equity today? Are you using a third-party consultant? Are you using a software as a service, law firm, in-house, exploring options? I'll leave it on for a couple of seconds here, but it'll be really helpful. We've conducted the survey numerous times, and there's usually a balanced result here where we see some people, doing it with a third-party consultant with software. Some are still exploring options, but more and more the trend is heading towards kind of moving it, more and more towards a software approach that has the combination of bringing it in-house as well as access to specialist consultants and stuff. So I'll leave it open here for some time as we collect answers. There you go. So the results really, it looks like it's a little bit different than what I've seen in the past. But it seems like there's 60% in-house and 40% are exploring options. Not sure if the in-house people are actually using softwares or doing it on, R modeling or Python or Excel or a combination of them. But those are the results, definitely very different than what we've run in the past. Moving on to pay equity standards. So globally, we think of pay equity as being divided into these three main pay equity frameworks. So there's the equal pay for equal work, which is a US federal standard. It doesn't apply most of the times, right? It's like just on the federal perspective, and I'm sure hopefully over time it changes, but you can already see the effects, like different states in the US kind of passed different laws changing that, where they said, no, we don't want to talk about equal pay for equal work. We want to talk about equal pay for comparable work, is what the standard was. So that takes me to the next one, which is really the the equal pay for comparable work, where employees performing substantially similar work must be paid equitably. Some substantially similar typically means with respect to skill, effort, responsibility, and working conditions. Are they getting paid equitably? And then you have the EU framework, or the Canadian framework, which is really equal pay for work of equal value. But then they go on to say, or comparable value. So that's really, you could think about employees that are performing different work, but that can be shown to have equal value to the organization from a very objective criteria. Those employees should be compared together. So, Jessica, as you approach the pay equity kind of analyses, how important was it for you to get these groupings right? What framework do you think you applied when you were doing the analyses?
So we've had a job architecture in place for a number of years. When we first started doing the in-house studies, it exposed maybe a little bit. We don't do job grading here at Kiewit, we do pure market pricing. And so what that exposed for us was in our architecture, there were some functional areas or departments where there wasn't the same levels of progression. So because we didn't have job grading, say maybe we didn't have 6 levels in our accounting department as we did in, say, our finance department. And so we took a step back and said, annually we get business cases put forward to evaluate any additions or changes to our job architecture. But we said, let's take on a whole project, see if we can actually really level out the responsibility levels across functional departments so that we could say we had a structure that allowed us to think through comparable value. And for us, that means really the same responsibility level. And that's really even how we think about some of our long-term options here at Kiewit's pay structure. And so that really fit well for our executives to buy into how we want to evaluate paying our people fairly or equivalently. And that was based off of that responsibility level. So that's kind of where our mind is shifted in-house, is that let's think about the responsibility level that the roles that these employees are filling are accountable to withhold.
Understood. Okay. Um, and then just for the audience here, there's why is pay equity really becoming more and more prevalent now? I mean, of course, we've gone through the whole imperatives, so I don't want to repeat that, but really laws have always existed, around pay equity, whether it's in the US, whether it's globally, laws have always been there. I mean, the federal law in the US was passed in 1963, right? So the laws have always been there. It's just there was no enforcement of those laws, right? So the way we kind of discuss it internally is like there were freeways with speed limits, but there was no one really enforcing. There was no camera system. There was no traffic police kind of enforcing the speed limits. But now there are enforcement agencies, and what that really means is how they're enforcing it. Well, look at EU Pay Transparency Directive. They're asking you to look at your pay gaps, and if you don't meet a certain threshold, then you're subject to a joint pay assessment that goes into effect 2026. Sweden recently released their version of the first draft of how they will adopt this EU Pay Transparency Directive. We're thinking Germany is going to release that very soon too. And then you have, in the US, you have states like Illinois requiring you to submit pay data, but also obtain pay equity certification. State of Minnesota, you have state of California. So you have these different states that are coming online, and then obviously the pay transparency is the biggest component, where you're now, all of this is getting enforced not just by regulatory agencies, but by employees themselves. You have a range posted publicly, and anyone can kind of really come to you and say like, hey, why I saw that you're hiring for my role, but I'm at $80,000 and the new role is at $100,000 to $120,000. So that's kind of creating some enforcement right there too. Any thoughts, Jessica, on this?
Yeah, I do think that, when you think about some of these employment equity laws, really driven by government bodies, right? You have a lot of government organizations that were already posting ranges for the positions that they hire for. They've already been doing that for a number of years. And then you have most of these private industry sectors that were not, right? And now law is dictating that you do. But I think the reason that a lot of that comes about is because you do have these social influences that happen. More and more society is influencing the direction of law, and as a result, private industries are seeing that the want and the voice of the employee or the general population is putting that pressure for governments to get involved and make them do some of these things. And so I think in just generationally, we're going to see that social media has pushed us that direction, not only in employment law, but in so many other fronts. And so I do think that it's not going to go backwards. It's probably going to just continue to see that pressure, and the more knowledge that's out there, um, it's going to force that regulation to just even happen and occur faster. You see
Right.
states get on board that you probably never thought you would see get on board. A lot of it is dictated a lot by just what that state is like in terms of their political nature. But as it goes federally, it's going to go beyond just a state decision. So I do think
Right.
society is probably the biggest factor, influencing the speed at what we're seeing these things happen.
Definitely, definitely, I would agree with that. I know we're almost at time, so I just wanted to really cover this last component, which if you think about pay data compliance, it really kind of falls into one of these frameworks, which is really collection. Certain jurisdictions you have to collect the data, sit on it, and then produce it when asked for. Some jurisdictions you have to collect, analyze, report. Some jurisdictions you collect, analyze, report, and be transparent with your salary ranges and career progressions. So it's really a good way to kind of think about every single jurisdiction that you operate in, whether internationally, in the US and Canada. Try to break it out into these kind of in this framework and see what's really applicable to you. But then when you are doing pay equity, make sure that you have a very holistic approach and not just focused on one particular jurisdiction analyses, because you will not be able to take any actionable insights because you might not involve all of the employees in that analysis, right? So make sure that you're always kind of including all employees in the analyses to the furthest extent possible. I know sometimes it's like union employees and stuff are not included generally, but don't just restrict your analyses. Oh, I just want to do it from the lens of Illinois, but then you have comparable employees in Florida, California, New Jersey, or even internationally that are not included in that analysis, and now you're making decisions just based on that subset of analyses. So with that being said, I know we didn't really get into looking at what the PayParity software looks like, but would highly encourage you guys to kind of reach out and so we can show you on a one-on-one meeting what that software looks like, how it makes your life easier. But in closing thoughts, I would invite Jessica to really, Jessica, is there anything that you want to tell the audience here, like how software makes it easier? What are the pros about kind of utilizing or moving, transitioning to this new modern way of looking at pay equity?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is efficiency, right? And being the one that had done the in-house study, we have also grown since that time, right? We went from 10 to 12,000, now we're 15,000 staff. And being able to, start a study, have a study ran, have some internal discussions before you want to go and remediate anything, add this lens or change this factor, and really narrow that down. You are going 3 steps backwards when you have to restart your data dive and your data collection in Excel. And basically, this allows a more real-time approach with a more robust methodology that is supported outside of your own organization. That's the biggest thing is, right, you don't want to only have your lens of your organization. You want to be able to make sure it's relevant to the things that are out there and that we're going to be obliged and required to do from a compliance standpoint. So I do think that software is an approach that helps you do that. If you want to be a company that is more infusing this thought into how you conduct compensation structure at your organization. If it's just a check the box, I want to make sure I'm equitable and I'm compliant, that's where you do probably go down more of that consultant approach and you get someone externally to do it. That's what we did when we first were required to do it in Quebec. It could be costly, and you're going to have that cost every few years that you're required to do it. And who's to say that that doesn't change? It previously was 10 years, now it's every 5 years. So it could be every year, and then you're having to budget that. And let's be a little bit more forward thinking on how we can actually not just do it for the sake of doing it, but really believe in a priority between the belief as the employer and the employee.
Perfect. Well, thank you for sharing that insight, Jessica. And I know we ran a little over, but like I said, yeah, we won't be able to get to the next step, which is really kind of looking at the software today. But if you there's our contact information. Please kind of reach out, to schedule a personalized demo if you would like to see how the software really works. We're more than happy to schedule that one-on-one and show you the solution.
Yeah, we did 2 demos before we went forward, and we kind of played around with the other things that the software provided with, like opportunity parity and all of that additional advantages that Trusaic offered. So I would say list out some of the things that are drawing you to Trusaic, or list out the things that are available externally, and really identify what one offers and what that one doesn't.
Perfect. Thank you, Jessica. And I want to just thank Jessica and everyone that attended here. Jessica, thank you so much for sharing your insights with the audience here. I think it's super helpful for everyone to just learn from you, from a practitioner, from a specialist, really, how you're approaching compensation, pay equity at a large organization like Hewitt. So really appreciate your time. Thank you for being with us. And thank you everyone for attending today's session, and apologies for running a little over.
Yes, Olivia, thank you, Anuj, and thank you, Jessica. Yes, thank you again for your time today. And as a reminder for our audience, we'll be sharing a link to access this console where you can view the session on demand, access resources, schedule a meeting. Sorry we didn't get to finish we went a little overtime today, but if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Anuj and Jessica with their contact information on the screen. And on behalf of Trusaic, I want to thank you all again for your participation today, and have a great day.